Hello and welcome to Two Bi Guys. I am Rob. Today we're going to talk about sex and apps and dating and queerness. As usual, I'm here with Stephen Quaderer. He is a New York City-based entrepreneur. He's the founder and CEO of The Thought Experiment, T-H-O-T, Thought, which is creating sex-positive, inclusive, and joyful platforms for sexual exploration and experimentation, things we love. And he's the creator of the app Headero, the connection app for people who love oral pleasure, and that's hetero with a D, H-E-A-D. So welcome to Two Bi Guys, Stephen. Nice to have you.
Thanks so much for having me. Really excited to chat with you and the Two Bi Guys community about hetero and all things oral sex.
Yeah, I remember hearing about your app or maybe seeing it at some club or a party. You were promoting something and I got into it before we ever met. So it was nice to meet you a few months ago and now talk to you here. Before we get into the app and all that and oral sex, we can talk all day about oral sex. Let's start with you. What pronouns do you use? How do you identify on any spectrums you would like to identify on?
Hi again, my name is Stephen. I'm a cis man. My pronouns are he, him, and I identify as both gay and pansexual, which I acknowledge is somewhat of a contradiction, but is genuinely true to who I am.
Cool. I have many follow-ups on that. So I mean, you're not the first person we've had on lately who identifies as gay and pansexual. I feel like when we started this podcast, I didn't see that so often, and really very recently I'm seeing that a lot more, and it's awesome. And my co-host Alex, who drops by from time to time, I think sort of identifies that way too, and bi. So I'm curious, I'm assuming you came to the gay identity first. Like, how did you come to that identity? Tell us the story, and then I want to talk about how it connects to pansexuality and how that happened.
Yes, you're right. The first sexuality label that I applied to myself was that of a gay man.
Cool.
My first relationship and sexual experiences were with someone of the same sex in high school. And in college, I dated a few women and hooked up with a few guys, but didn't really find myself in any serious relationships. My first relationship after college was with, a gay man with, he was actually a classmate of mine, but we really got introduced to one another in New York City. And, I felt that this was something serious. It was my first post-college romance. And I kind of realized that I shouldn't stay in the closet. I needed to come out and tell people about this. That's just a normal, healthy part about being in a relationship. But at the same time, I had this feeling that in doing so, I would have to kind of shoehorn my own sexuality into a specific box, right? And I knew that it didn't entirely fit, right? And I was kind of resistant to it. And I kind of had this, part of the fear and the difficulty in coming out, of course, was just that fear that everyone that comes out as queer or not heteronormative, right? That of rejection, right? So that was the big one. But the other was that I would have to kind of contort who I was into what society expected me to be. And for me, that was the box of being gay. And I actually even said this, I said to one person, only one person, my brother, I said, look, this isn't all of who I am, but I'm coming to terms with this. And I'm going to be viewed and be a gay person from here on out. And I just accepted that for years, for over 15 years. But I would say, over time, being gay and identifying as gay has really, truly been such a huge and welcome part of my identity over time. I've connected with the community of friends and lovers who have, helped me grow and been a support structure and a family for me. And it wasn't until much later in life that I realized, well, you know what, I can keep that. And I can also acknowledge this other part of who I am, right? That I'm also attracted to people of all genders. And for me, when I came to that realization, pansexual seemed to be the most fitting. So I said, well, okay, maybe it's not logically consistent, but I am going to identify as both.
Cool.
Yeah.
And so before that relationship after college, like, so you were hooking up or dating with guys, but not. But when you say you were in the closet, you mean you didn't share that with anyone else other than those guys?
That's right. That's right. Yeah, and I had relationships and sexual experiences with women as well. And it was like it was like like I would be dating, and then I would and for me, New York City, which is where I grew up just outside of New York City, was always the place where I could be freest to explore the queer side of who I am. You know.
Hmm. Cool. Yeah, that's interesting. And so when you came out, did you like think about those relationships you had with women and stuff? And like, was that part of the box you kind of realized you didn't quite fit into?
Yeah, definitely. And it caused some like people were like, "What was that?" And I'm
Uh
like,
huh.
and there wasn't a great explanation, but like, yeah, that was I was attracted to this person, and there was also like an exploration and experimentation because like for me, I did it very differently. Like my first relationship, my first love, was of the same gender as me, and so then college was like, okay, well, let's try out these, like let's go and explore that part of who I am. I mean,
Hmm.
that was true to me, but yeah, so very much then like going into this, you know, for some period of time and just being like, well, no, I'm going to embrace this part of who I am, which is gay, and just sort of run with that. And I did that for
Yeah.
years.
Yeah. It's interesting because like your story reminds me a lot of my co-host Alex, who really talks about the gay box the same way of like he knew he was attracted to men, and so he felt like he had to just sort of, then you're in that box if you want to tell people about it. And it's kind of like I feel the same way looking back, like I was in a straight box identifying as
Mm,
straight, but because it was like the default and like you didn't really have to make a choice to be straight, you just had to make no
totally.
choice almost,
Yeah.
that I didn't really like realize how much of a box I was in until like my late 20s and my attractions to men were bubbling up. But like I guess my question is, in addition, if you have any thoughts on that, but like do you think because a gay identity is like such an active choice and such a like putting you outside the mainstream, especially 10, 20 years ago, like
Totally.
that then it forces you to like abandon these like other things, or like I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? And like
Absolutely.
there's I just see it so many more so much more lately that people who chose the gay sort of label initially are now kind of wanting to break out of the rigidity of that.
Yeah, absolutely. What I would say, and I think that that's another part of the reason why I identify strongly as being gay, because it did liberate me in so many ways because you're suddenly outside of the norm, the normative kind of like societal framing in a lot of ways. And so that was core to, for me, sexual liberation. Because like being queer, we're outside of the norm, so that gives you the opportunity to go out and explore your sexuality, to explore sex, and to meet lovers in an environment that is grounded not in stigma, that's grounded in joy and excitement and love and all of the good things. So I think that in that sense, sort of taking that gay label really did liberate me in so many different dimensions. Because like, yeah, I'm out there. I came out of the closet. It was incredibly hard psychologically. The single hardest thing I think I've ever personally chosen to do. You
Yeah.
know,
Yep.
and I came out on the other side of that, and I'm like, well, I lived through this. Like I made it, and like it gives you a strength that you just wouldn't have thought that you had.
Yeah. Yeah, same with me and like the bi label, which
Yeah,
I took on later, but like
yeah,
getting through that sort of hurdle or barrier, then like then it kind of opened me up and freed me up to think about like more than just what I thought of as the bi label, and also what does the label really mean? Like what might I be interested in a labelless way? Like what if I didn't think of myself as
yeah.
anything? And I'm actually especially like people slightly younger than me these days, like in their 20s and stuff, like I'm hearing that a lot. They're like,
Yeah.
I'm not bi, I'm not fluid, I'm like nothing. I'm whatever I want to be today, and tomorrow I'll be whatever I want to be tomorrow. And I've literally have friends who will say they're gay one day and bi another day just because
I
they
love
feel
it.
like it that day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you identify with that, or have you seen a lot of that? This may lead us into your thought experiment in
Yeah.
a minute.
It absolutely does. It very much resonates with me, and I think that this sort of it's a fascinating thing, these labels, because I see it in myself. I see it in my own life. I see how they can be extremely beneficial when you put them on yourself, right? When I have self-selected this, then I have this community of people who are supportive. This is like it's a suit of armor. It's a warm blanket. Um, but at the same time, when someone else puts that label on you because of a characteristic that they perceive, then it's a a straight jacket, right?
Yeah.
And
Literally.
yeah,
A straight
exactly.
jacket.
Like, it's
Yeah.
literally so it is something that I think about quite a bit, and it very much did influence how we've approached things. The mission and purpose of Thought Experiment, but very much its core to how we designed Hetero, and really the genesis of the idea was really like core was really tied into this.
Cool. Okay, one more labels question and then we'll
Yeah,
get into the work you're doing.
yeah.
So when exactly did you take on the pansexual label, and like why, what was going on? Like what does that mean to you, and how has that identity, if at all, changed like the way you're approaching dating or sex or relationships?
Yeah, it's sort of interesting. So before I took on the pan label, like I hadn't heard of it at this time, but I remember, obviously as we all do, I went through, a few different relationships, and after one breakup, I went online and I was like, well, I want to explore both sides of who I am, right, without putting a label on it. And I went on, one of the apps or one of the websites, and I was chatting with a girl, and we were like totally having a great back and forth. And I just felt like, well, I feel like I need to like disclose this, right? Like like the fact that I identify as gay and I've had male lovers, and I just felt like that was the right thing to do. And maybe it wasn't, but when I did, it was really really stark. Where she said basically immediately like, well, thank you, but no thank you. And it was because she's like, well, I just don't want that extra competition. And of course,
Mhm.
like consent, right?
Oh,
Like consent matters. So if like you're not down with me, that's cool. But it really like it struck me, and it put me like I like had sort of like bubbled my head up to the surface, and I felt like I got hit on the head, and I was like, okay, back down again,
yeah.
you know. And then it wasn't until really I started this journey with Thought Experiment and with Hetero that I really reevaluated this and became comfortable of disclosing this to people again. And then with that disclosure, finding a label that I thought was better fitting for me. So, identifying as gay and pan, this is like 2.5 years to maybe 3 years that I've kind of like taken this and owned it and been open about it and told people, which was another, like, I felt like I was coming out of the closet again.
Right. Right. I was gonna say, how did it compare to the coming out as gay? Like, it sounds like different but similar kind of stigmas.
Yeah. I mean, I would say, it was very different because like I'd already gone through the coming out of the closet process, and I knew, and I have this group of people who I love and trust, and I think that big one, that fear of rejection, wasn't there, you know
Uh-huh.
but that's still that, like, what is this, you don't fit into kind of like that was still there. And I would say it was more kind of like a befuddlement than anything else. Like some people would just be like, what is, I don't even understand what that means, like.
Yeah.
And so I think that was my second coming out, was really more along those lines. So much it was a much lower threshold. Like I'd already come out, and now it was just like, oh, also this kind of
Yeah.
is how it
Yeah.
felt,
Yeah. Yeah. It seems like when people come out as gay, it's like people usually believe you, and they also like understand what that means pretty quickly. But
Yeah.
then coming out as like bi or pan or fluid or something else, it's like, A, people don't believe you. They think you're like really gay or something else or whatever, or confused or whatever. And
Yeah.
B, they don't really know what it means or why you're telling them or like what.
Yeah.
Yes. So
To-
there's that too.
Totally. I mean, I had one friend who, after I came out, and he's still a good friend of mine, but like he then responded back with like, oh, in like a friend group chat, like about like he put pan in quotation marks, and I just kind of like took him aside afterwards. I'm like, you're kind of being like, like your auntie who's like, oh, are you, like it's sort of like you're not really accepting that this is. It's sort of like it's still putting that seed of doubt. Like, is this a real thing? It's like, it's real. It is
Yeah.
who I am. So like, but I think that was just not that hard of a conversation, but it's definitely exists. And like bi erasure is definitely incredibly real. And that's very unfortunate in the fact that the stigma exists on, bi erasure and pan erasure on kind of like, unfortunately, both sides of the spectrum,
Yeah. Right. I mean, the bi erasure hurts. Like, I think there's so many straight identified men who might come out as bi if there weren't so much stigma and biphobia. But I feel like there's that in the gay community too.
Totally.
That like, if there's stigma there against fluid sexuality, and it boxes a lot of gay men and probably lesbian women in also.
Absolutely. I honestly believe that to be true. Yeah.
This episode of Two Bi Guys is sponsored by Hinge, the dating app that believes anyone looking for love should be able to find it. Dating as a queer person can be very challenging. If you listen to this podcast, you know that. That's what we talk about all the time. And it's especially complicated if you identify as bisexual, pansexual, fluid, anywhere in the middle of the sexuality spectrum or gender spectrum. That's in large part why we started this podcast, to answer some of those questions specifically for bi people. But there's always more. And so, to help our community navigate the complicated world of LGBTQIA plus dating, Hinge is bringing you not so frequently asked questions. It's answers to the LGBTQIA plus questions that are not talked about enough. They've set up this website with lots of these questions. The responses are from diverse creators from the queer community. So hopefully this is a resource that can help you navigate the less straightforward areas of dating as a queer person or dating another queer person. Some of the questions you can find answers to there are, how can I start dating if I'm not ready to come out? How do I recover from accidentally misgendering while trying to flirt? Or if you're demisexual, what's the best way to set expectations around waiting to get sexual? If you're listening to this podcast, you may have some questions about dating specifically as a bi person or dating another bi or pan or fluid person. You can submit your questions, you can get answers to other questions, and learn more about how other people navigate these dating challenges. So, to learn more and hear different perspectives on these not so frequently asked questions, go to hinge.nfaq.co. That's hinge.nfaq.co. And now a word from our sponsor and podcasting platform, Zencastr. Creating and producing your own podcast can be challenging, as I know. I pretty much do everything from start to finish. Podcasting can sometimes mean opening 14 different tabs so that you can record, edit, publish, monetize, listen. But since I've used Zencastr, everything has been much more streamlined. Creating a quality podcast no longer has to involve a dozen different apps strung together on disparate platforms. Zencastr's modern podcasting stack allows you to do everything you need for your podcast, from recording to publishing, all in one place. Since I've switched to Zencastr, it's been super easy. It's also super easy for my guests to come in and join for an episode. Everything is right there in the web browser. And now Zencastr is adding even more features for video podcasting, which I've heard is the way of the future. Zencastr now, in addition to the best quality sound, which is why I chose Zencastr in the first place, Zencastr also records video up to 4K to give you the picture-perfect quality that your video podcast deserves. And they can distribute your video podcast in 1080 1080p to all available video podcast players. Plus, now you can also add your own custom watermark and brand your content. I gotta try that. It's a new feature. We haven't done it yet, but we will soon. And if you've watched our social media, you can see the quality. It's great. I highly recommend Zencastr. I think it's super easy to use. It's reasonably priced. If you're interested in podcasting or recording audio and video with Zencastr, go to zencastr.com/pricing and use my code 2BuyGuys1, the number 1, and you'll get 30% off your first 3 months of Zencastr Professional. That's zencastr.com/pricing and use the promo code 2BuyGuys1, TWOBIGUIS, the number 1. I want you to have the same easy experience as I do for all my podcasting and content needs. It's time to share your story with Zencastr. So all of that kind of makes sense to lead to the work you're doing. So start wherever you want, I guess. I guess with the thought experiment and why you started it, what it's about.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll start with thought experiment. So for me, being a gay man and kind of being, I believe through that experience, having become sexually liberated, I came to realize that sex is really a wonderful thing. It's a great way to explore yourself, to explore others. It's joyful, it's uplifting. I have grown so much through lovers and through just this experience of kind of like infinite kind of like discovery process that you can find through sex, and how wonderful sex is when it's grounded in consent. Right? Like that's all you need, right? Like you have two consenting adults, and you can go on this wonderful, amazing, uplifting journey together, right? And so like that, because of this sexually liberated kind of experience that I had, was, I hold that dearly, in my heart. Like this is a wonderful thing. And then I contrast it to how society treats sex, and where it's grounded in stigma. And so it's getting it so wrong. And we know, right? Like stigma, it applies not based on any moral absolutes. It applies based on power hierarchies, right? Like it's about control. And to me, the juxtaposition of what sex is, this wonderful part of who we are, and how society treats it is just so jarring.
Yeah.
And, and so that has bothered me for years. It's really bothered me. And, we treat sex as if it's some dirty thing. And it, unfortunately, that does nothing but enable, abusers, because it's getting it all wrong.
Yeah.
And so that has been, it's been a passion of mine. Right. And I didn't know where to apply it. And so the idea for hetero came first. Like the problem was there, and it was like always like, buzzing around in my mind. And then hetero, the idea for hetero was to create a space that was legitimately for everyone, all gender identities and all sexualities, right? And so the way, the kind of like the realization that I had, the how to do that, was to, instead of ground in identity, which is kind of the norm in the hookup app space, particularly in like the gay space, right? Like you've got apps for people based on, first of all, they are like typically segmented based on like your sexuality, right? And then they further segment based on like your body type, or like literally your facial hair, or your ethnicity, or your age, right? And the problem that I saw with that was it was just sort of like taking this community and really thinning it out, and putting ourselves into like smaller and smaller little boxes. And so the aha moment for me was to, okay, well, let's just flip that problem on its head, for lack of a better word. And rather than focus on identity, focus on desire, because desire can be shared by everyone, by people of all identities.
Yeah.
And so that was the genesis of the idea for hetero. Yeah.
Cool. You're allowed to make as many puns as you want on this podcast.
Thank you.
Bye. People love puns. And then you started hetero. I have more questions about that, but then and then now you have this sort of umbrella mission with the thought experiment. Like,
Yeah.
first of all, how do you define thought, and then what's the thought experiment?
Yeah. So thought, to me is someone honestly who's just sexually liberated. Like, uh, you know, I don't know if I can curse, but like fuck slut shaming.
Yeah,
Like it's
you can
all like
curse.
okay, all of the things that
We're an
like
explicit podcast.
okay, all right, cool. So like it's just that's everything that's wrong, right? Like slut shaming is everything that's wrong. It's stigma grounded, it's stigma based, and
Yeah.
we talked about the labels, and sometimes you can just take a label, turn it inside out, and own it, and that's kind of what I wanted to do with Thought Experiment. Um, and also acknowledging that sex and sexuality is a discovery process. So I liked the idea of experimentation, and so that was what sort of like grounded Thought Experiment. And then the bigger idea with Thought Experiment is to enable a community of people who share a common set of values that are again distilled to the core, you know around sex positivity, and I have a lot of like there's a lot to unpack there,
Mm-hmm.
and to reject stigma, really, like, and to be consent grounded, sex positive, inclusive space that rejects stigma. So like that was
Yeah.
the idea of like, well, you could do a lot. There's a lot of different things that you could do within that kind of like that broad umbrella.
Cool. Cool. That so sounds awesome. And it makes so much sense to me, this idea of like, because I grew up with so much stigma around sex. And it was such a like thing that you did in the dark, in private, and you didn't talk to anyone about. And like there was a lot of like shame associated with it, but also like competition. It was
Yeah.
like competition among my straight male friends to see who could like get the most ass. But then it wasn't actually like about, did you enjoy it, and did it
Yeah.
feel good, and
Yeah.
did your make your
Your
partner feel good,
partner.
and
Yeah.
was it all consensual, and like
Yeah.
no, it was just like, did you bang someone? And
Yeah.
like I think there's also something connected to like queerness, in that my perception of all this started shifting with the change in my perception of my sexuality. And like
Yeah.
I started thinking more in terms of, well, consent, which I want to talk about, but like pleasure. And like
Yeah.
this is the whole point of it, is pleasure.
Yeah.
And like, why not start there? And if you are starting there, then what's all the shame for, and what's all the stigma for, if you're like
Yeah.
doing a something pleasurable between two consenting people? And so that makes sense as a place to start, and it is
Yeah.
kind of a queer way of looking at sex and relationships.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree. And that's being pleasure centric, and that is kind of like the kernel of the idea, because like pleasure and desire go hand in hand. And then going back to our earlier conversation around labels, that my own experience with labels really did inform the design of Hetero, and as did a lot of like discussions with the community, with the gay community, bi, pan. Like we had a long process of engaging with people to make sure that we were getting it right.
Uh-huh.
But one of the things that you see within Hetero is actually we don't utilize any of the sexuality boxes. Never asks for your sexuality. What the app asks for is your gender identity and what gender identities you're down with, and it allows for real time fluidity in either dimension.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So like very much what we were talking about around, these boxes, like really at the end of the day, we felt that they just weren't necessary for this space. Will allow you to connect with whomever you'd like to connect with.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sort of taking that restrictive element, just taking it out entirely and just architecting the whole thing differently.
Right. It's like there is a time in your personal life where a label can sort of help you and expand your world, but
Right.
it does seem like on an app to connect with people, that might actually limit things.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Because
Yeah,
what if there's someone outside what you thought of that likes something you like, and you would have a good time together?
exactly.
So what were those conversations like with community, or how did you develop that? Or
Yeah. I mean, it was through outreach and a number of like digital channels. So I had the idea for Hetero in like January of 2020, and obviously the pandemic hit, and I think so. I
Perfect
was like,
timing.
yeah, but in a way, it really worked out because like I realized like, well, I'm not going to launch this thing in the middle of this pandemic, and unfortunately, obviously, the pandemic is still going, but
Yeah.
nevertheless, I viewed that as giving a lot of time, right? Like I didn't feel any time pressure, so I just first I got educated in terms of like how to conduct kind of like research with people, right? Like, so I hired a researcher, she taught me, she did a little bit, and then I just reached out in a lot of different channels, and I said, hey, we're trying to create a new type of hookup app that is inclusive of all gender identities, all sexualities, and we want to get your feedback. And that process, and so I kind of had like a script of questions where I talked about what the app was, and then there was a lot of just like free flowing dialogue. And that was by far just like the best move because I got real feedback. Like one person, it was a trans man who said like, look, the way that I even like I set up the questionnaire, he was like, you got it wrong. Like the way that you framed, and it totally shifted the way that we architected gender identity. And so like that was great because like I honestly, as much as I was trying to get it right, I still hadn't lived that experience.
Yep.
So talking with someone who was trans, that sort of could say like, look, this, I know what you're thinking, and this was like literally the words that he used, but like, you know but this is where you're getting it wrong, and just like, no, just great constructive feedback, and it totally shifted the way that we actually architected it. And
Yeah.
so I was really grateful for having had that experience and having had that opportunity to talk with folks, across a wide spectrum of gender identities and sexualities.
Cool. And now, word from our sponsor, BetterHelp. When I was first recognizing my bisexuality and coming to terms with it, I thought it was something I would take to the grave and never tell anyone. I was very stuck focusing on problems instead of solutions. I was very wrapped up in fear of what would happen if I came out. And I was not really thinking of all the joy and positive changes that would come from coming out. One of the things that really changed things for me was therapy and finding a therapist. It's helped me to stop focusing on those fears, and it's helped me to be more authentic, get in touch with my feelings, speak my truth, and relate and communicate better with other people. There's this perception that if you see a therapist, it means something's, quote, wrong. I totally disagree. I think everyone can benefit from talk therapy. So if you are thinking of giving therapy a try, BetterHelp is a great option. Full disclosure, I have not tried BetterHelp myself. I already have a therapist for many years who I love, but BetterHelp is great for many people. It's convenient, it's accessible, it's affordable, and it's entirely online. When you go to BetterHelp.com, you get matched with a therapist after filling out a brief survey, and you can switch therapists anytime. When you want to be a better problem solver, therapy can get you there. Visit BetterHelp.com/2ByGuys today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp.com/2ByGuys. I'd like to thank Tracy's dog for sponsoring this episode of Two Bi Guys. What is Tracy's dog, you might ask? It may not be what you think. Tracy's dog is a maker of all kinds of sex toys to spice up your and your partner's love life. Now, you've probably had plenty of clitoral orgasms. You may have even experienced some G-spot orgasms. And, both damn good in their own right. But now imagine if you can experience both at the same time in one phenomenal fireworks-like finale. And you can have it whenever you're in the mood. That sounds great to me, although I don't know if I will be able to personally experience a clitoral orgasm and a G-spot orgasm at the same time, but many of our listeners may in fact be able to. So if that's you, Tracy's dog brings you the OG Pro 2, the sucking stimulator that delivers lovely, nice, soft-lipped sucking sensations. You can use it by yourself on your own or during a foreplay session with your partner. Tracy's dog sent me one of these. I got to try it out, even though I couldn't use it on my clit. I could use it on other parts of my body, and the sucking vibrator part was very cool. It creates a little suction and feels very nice. It comes with a remote control for hands-free orgasm, and it's waterproof, so you can have a blast anywhere you want, even in the bathtub, shower, other places. Be creative. It's super soft and lovely on the body. It's beginner-friendly. It's great for people of all abilities and desires. So go to tracysdog.com to order Tracy's Dog OG Pro 2 today. And if you use promo code 2BYGUYS, you can get 15% off. That's Tracy's Dog, TRACYSDOG.com. Promo code 2BYGUYS, TWOBIGUYS, for 15% off. And check out the OG Pro 2 today. Oh, and before you use it, make sure you get some towels ready at your side. Trust me, you're gonna need them. So hetero is kind of like designed around oral sex, right? And so, okay,
Correct.
connect with anyone, talk about the oral sex and have some oral sex, right? So is that like, is it like, do you see it expanding? Is this like a proof of concept? Is it like, is the idea like connect over an activity you want to do, or, but add other sort of things? Or is it oral sex and then you're going to do something else entirely? What's your
Yeah.
like vision?
Yeah. So the vision, for hetero is one. I would say it's pretty clear that there's some real resonance here. I had this idea, and I am an oral enthusiast myself. Like no question about that. And there's been a resonance within, amazingly, because like this was the core of what we wanted to achieve, was my dream. It's happening. You've got people of a wide variety of gender identities, sexualities that are actively using the app today. And so that was the first step, like just see, and then the thought process was to see what the community kind of wanted. And the way that I'm thinking about this now, so it was always that hetero, would be kind of like a standalone community of people who had this shared interest, this shared desire, and then we engage in a dialogue, a continual dialogue with this community, with our community, and see what else, right? Because like I think the way that we're thinking about it is, with thought experiment, we can find, with this community, we can have a dialogue and think about what else people would like to have that doesn't exist today or doesn't exist in the form that people want it. So that's kind of the vision. And then for hetero itself, the way that, I think about it is, you can go on the app and you can connect over a wide range of kinks and like other things that are core to who you are, like other desires you can pursue, but you just kind of know like everyone on the app is like down with oral, either giving or receiving. Like that's the way I kind of think about it at this stage.
I mean, I don't know if this is the right term. It's like an affinity group, but for this, like
sure.
just like, okay, people who are all have this thing in common, but that's not necessarily the only thing we have to talk about or we have to do. But at least you're like in a oral friendly environment, I guess.
Yeah, totally. Which,
and it opens the door to conversations, I would assume.
Yeah. And, I love oral, but it's not all I love. Right. And so, I do appreciate that I'm in this environment with like, my partner is going to be down with that. They're going to like that. So like, that's cool. Cause I like it,
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I guess I'm curious the reception based on identity. And I know that the whole point and the goal is like to get rid of identity as a gatekeeping thing. But like at the same time, I'm like, okay, an oral sex app is probably going to really appeal to like a lot of gay men and maybe not necessarily like a straight woman. But like I get your goals, like change that, right? And destigmatize it to make it, why should a straight woman feel or anyone feel like weird or ashamed of this? But like, what has the reception been? Have you seen that? Is there like an uphill battle to get there?
Yeah, definitely. What we've seen is that, as you've mentioned, the gay community and really the queer community at large have been early adopters of hetero. That was expected. The queer community is fairly sexually liberated relative to the quote unquote straight community. And also, it's a reflection of how we went about launching Hetero. We were really intentional about connecting with the queer community, sponsoring events, going to queer spaces, and talking about our purpose, like why we've created Hetero, and listening to feedback. And I personally identifying as gay and pansexual, it was really, really, critical to me that the queer community was represented on Hetero, that they felt that this was an app that was for them, right? And it's been really incredibly affirming to see the response from queer folks, both in joining the Hetero community and by sharing and talking about our platform, which is really critical given we can't advertise in any meaningful way. But we also found that straight, quote unquote, cisgender men were really interested in Hetero. Maybe not a huge surprise that an oral sex app was something that quote unquote straight men were fairly excited to sign up for. And then you're right, the conversation with straight, quote unquote, women, cis women, was more nuanced. We had to recognize why straight cis women oftentimes don't feel comfortable or safe in sex forward spaces, and address that with our app and our community, right? With education, with features, and by creating a community that was fundamentally grounded in safety and consent. And I think that was really, really essential for us. And part of that journey was to connect with women that are already going to sex positive spaces, right? That have stepped beyond that stigma based framework. So, while it did take a little longer, and candidly, that process is ongoing, I can honestly say that Hetero is showing more and more progress every day in achieving its purpose of being a sex positive, consent driven space for people of all gender identities and all sexualities, which to me is really just so motivating. That's why I'm doing this, and I'm so excited to be here.
Right. It is cool, and it's cool that it's like bringing together like the queer people and straight people, because like why not? Like queer people and straight people can have sex and get along. No reason they can't if they are open to the other person. Let's get into this consent stuff and that rating system. First the rating system, then more about consent. But like, so the rating system seems awesome to me. It sounds like, why isn't everyone doing this? So like, I actually want to ask you that. Like, is there like a catch? Like, why isn't everyone doing that? I don't know. Could people game that system and abuse it, or how is it working out so far? Because it seems like, yeah, there's people on like a grinder or something that I have weird interactions with. And if I could say to other people, hey, watch out, that might be helpful and good to know. And then there's great people who I have a ton of fun with, even though their profile might be like not much. And I might want to be like, hey, this is a cool person.
Absolutely. What we're really trying to create with Hetero is a community, right? An inclusive, sex positive community. And so when we were creating the app, we spent a lot of time thinking about what it means and how to create community. And we recognized that accountability was a necessary precursor for community.
Yeah.
That concept led us to our ratings feature, where members can rate their experiences with people they've interacted with on Hetero on the basis of our community guidelines: inclusivity, sex positivity, and enthusiastic consent.
Yeah.
So to be clear, it's not a rating based on anyone's sexual ability or looks or anything of that nature, because there are real downsides to that approach. We don't want people to feel bad, right? And so we wanted this to be kind of like a positive, uplifting feature.
Right.
And while we still have the standard report functionality for violations, we think this gives additional insight and accountability back to our community.
Well, it's like Uber. You have rating systems in Uber. People could game it, but over time, it probably averages out to honesty. But it also is like, makes me think that, why do we treat sex so differently from anything else?
Yeah,
Actually, it is. I mean, it's not an Uber ride. It's different, but like, informing someone else how your experience was with another person is the same thing. And so like,
totally.
why do we put a sex app in a totally different category, and no one has even thought to do that, how was your experience rating kind of thing.
Yeah, totally. And also the way that we've thought about this, and I think we've seen it bear out, is it also creates an incentive structure to be kind, right? Like that is
Yeah.
totally lacking elsewhere.
Yeah.
Like every other app, we have a reporting feature, but all a reporting feature does is tell you this person's been bad, right? And so that's the only signal that is being put into this ecosystem. And in most apps, it's only going to like the admins. And now here is the thing that says like, yeah, actually this person's been wonderful. Like they truly made me feel welcome. And so like I'm giving them a 5-star for inclusivity. Or
Right.
they shared their boundaries and asked for my boundaries and respected those boundaries. I'm giving them a 5-star, giving them a heart for enthusiastic
Yeah.
consent, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so like that's there's finally like there's a positive incentive structure here too.
Right. Like in my head, the first thing I thought of was like people who are violating or boundaries or doing weird things like you would want to know. But it's like, yeah, I mean, yes, you would want to know, but like I'm pretty cautious anyway, and people could create a new profile and whatever. But that side of things you never see and would be really nice to just like have a little more confidence going in that like, oh, this other people think this person is cool and respectful too.
Totally.
And yeah, on like Grinder or other apps, there's so much bad behavior that's not non-consensual, but that's
Yeah.
just like rude,
Yeah.
or deleting people or blocking people for no
And
reason. And like, yeah, there's nothing to de-incentivize you doing that on those apps, so it happens all the time.
yeah, there's a lot of negativity in the other apps, and it's like, well, let's create a space with a community, and a community like there's a positive incentive structure. There's being
Yeah.
good gets yields you more connections and just a better life, frankly.
Yeah. So like when I came out and I was first exploring with men and I was not out, so I was doing it like secretly, and I was
Mm,
on some of these apps, and like I was like naive and I didn't always know like how does this work. And so, I had a lot of great experiences and fun experiences that led me to want to continue, but I also had some weird ones and bad ones and ones I like wouldn't want to do again and wished I had like asked the right asked a different question
mm,
beforehand or like
mm-hmm,
something.
mm-hmm.
And so it's like I guess my question is like, what was your experience with that kind of stuff that led you to realize this was very important, and like how do you help those people who might be exploring this stuff for the first time and want to do it safely? Like how can an app sort of help with that?
Yeah, yeah, totally. I think I my experience mirrors yours, to be honest, where I had some amazing uplifting experiences. I had some that were not so, whether it was just negativity in the chat environment, or just an experience that like wasn't great at the end of the day, where like I didn't feel super comfortable, or just didn't go the right way. So
Hmm.
absolutely, this was something that I was really focused on. Um, and so, kind of creating in my mind, I think that the longer term solution for this, insofar as you could call it that, is one, to enable a community, because I think communities do help to kind of like self regulate, set norms. Um, but as part of enabling that community, I think education is really, really huge. And it's also kind of, there's no, I think the word, right word, like there's an indictment on our education system that the very basics of sexual education are just not taught. So some people don't even know what consent is. They don't know what gender is. They don't know like, and so I think that we have a really great opportunity here. One, to enable this community, and really this rating feature is like it's the first step in that direction. There are other
Hmm.
steps that we've taken, but it's the most substantive. And then education, and then bringing those things together, education that enables community, community that creates education, is where I see this becoming something that is sustainably creating a truly like joyful sex positive space, right? Like there's no,
Yeah.
the technology doesn't do it. Technology, there's some, there's a place for it, but it's not the answer. Like we're
Mhm.
human beings, and enabling people to connect in an authentic and human way is, I think, the way to create a better experience for all of us.
Yeah. Interesting. And my other experience coming out as queer was like that I was no longer in the sort of traditional boxes of a straight relationship of like a male and female power dynamic. And like,
Oh yeah,
I never liked that power dynamic to begin with, but I don't think I really knew how to break out of it. I just assumed that's the way it has to be. And then with queer relationships, I realized like you're kind of forced to write your own script and talk
oh
about stuff, and where do you want to fall in this power dynamic. So I guess multiple questions again, like what's your experience with that, and like can we bring that to the straight world sort of like through this education and outreach you're talking about. Like, I think it would be cool if straight people also didn't get boxed into those dynamics and could write the script of their relationship from the ground up in the same way, but many people don't even know that's allowed.
yeah, I 100% agree. And I do, that is something that was, again, really wonderful for me in taking on that gay label, because it did exactly as you've said, right? Like we got to write and I got to figure out where I wanted to fit on the spectrum on all these different dimensions. And I do think of hetero and other kind of sex positive spaces and communities as a great space for people to question those things and to do the same, because there's no reason that people who are straight identifying can't. And so we do weave that into the app, in some ways subtle, in some ways not so subtle. So for instance, in relationship dynamics, we've got a whole host of things, right? Whether it's polyamory, we have one for female led relationships. Um, Compersion and cuckolding, like, and just like, and then people can be like, what is
Mm,
that? And,
mm,
it's sort of like, oh, I can explore that. And though, female led relationships is by far one of like the most widely selected of people who I would say don't self identify under the queer umbrella, which is kind of interesting.
mm.
Yeah. So I think that will enable people to ask questions of us as the people who are building this app, of the community, of themselves, of society. And I think those kinds of questions that's the path, right? Like that will lead us to this more sexually liberated and future, and where we cast aside these like pre-built power dynamics that never did fit and really
Yeah.
belong kind of like thrown away, you know?
Yeah. That is kind of cool too that people could find like stuff on an app that they don't know what it is and then
Right.
learn it there and
Right.
be like, "Oh yeah,
Yeah, I
I'll
want
try that."
that. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, like if you're not out or you're not talking to your friends about sex and kink and whatever, then like, yeah, learn about it somewhere.
Yeah.
Personally, I love to talk about everything in a sexual encounter like beforehand, and I kind of
Yeah.
like to set expectations and know what we're going to do and what is not going to be on the table, and it just like helps me kind of relax and not feel pressure to when I don't know exactly what we're going to do, I feel like pressure to figure it out, and then I'm not
Mm-hmm.
like in the moment.
Mm.
Okay, this is getting to a question, but like then I know other people who are like, I don't want to talk about everything. Like, just do whatever you want, and I'll tell you if I don't like it.
Yeah.
So like, what? I guess in your mind, what's the balance of that amount of like, what's the right amount of verbal consent or enthusiastic consent, or how do
Yeah.
you approach it, or how do you recommend people approach it to be on the same page?
Yeah. I think, I think that it can be, you can go about it a couple of different ways. Like the core of it is respecting the other person, respecting their agency, and keeping their needs, their desires forefront in your mind, which will lead to a better experience for everyone if we're all, living true to these things. I think that, that can be done in a way of really, even going so far as to scripting a scene, right? Like that can be, if that's what your partner is, makes them feel most comfortable, then I would encourage you to do that, right? Or it can be, agreeing on like, these are the signals, right? Like, I would say to the extent that you're meeting with someone new, at the very base level, you absolutely, even if it's not a kink scene, have a way of each of you identifying, like, I'm not comfortable, right? Like, have a safe word that
Mhm.
says, look, I'd like to take it easy. And it doesn't need to be like, you know, I'm being traumatized, but like, cool it, relax. Maybe we want to go chill out and watch Netflix for a while and come back to it. Like, I need time to process. So I would say that there are a lot of different paths, and kind of like being explicit about each and every step is not a necessity for consent unless it is for you, right? And
Mhm.
then if it is, verbalize that that's a boundary for you, and and if the other person doesn't respect that boundary, then that's a huge red flag, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
And so that's kind of the way that I think about it. There are multiple paths to get there, and it's really about what is the dynamic that works for these two people, that respects the core of it, of
Right.
respecting the other person and caring about them and caring about their needs and respecting their boundaries.
Right. Yeah, like it I mean, yeah, for me, I do like to know sort of or set a scene, have a
Yeah,
scene or know exactly, decide ahead of time, and then it takes some of this pressure off me. But like, yeah, that doesn't work for everyone. So just to have a space to talk about that and not have to like bring it up out of the blue, but to like have this set space to do it seems helpful.
yeah. I think the only other thing, kind of on the topic that we were just on, around sexual discovery, one of the things that I like about the number of different dynamics and kinks that we have in the app is some people aren't comfortable in sort of broaching that in like a chat dynamic,
Right.
and now you can just see, hey, we share this interest, and that can lead you a lot of really fun places.
Right. Right. Yeah. Like I mean, I have certain specific interests, and like sometimes it's hard to like once you're chatting with someone to say like, "Hey, this is
Yeah,
the thing I'm into," and so sometimes now I'm just like, "Fuck it, no shame." I'm just gonna like write that on my profile, and when people write to me and they're like, "Hey, that thing you wrote, I want to do that," then I'm like,
yeah,
"Let's chat," and I'm like much more eager to get into it with them. And it's like, why the fuck not? If that's what I want to do, why not just
totally,
be upfront about it? Yeah.
totally. And the other thing that we talked about was enabling community, and this is a broader,
Hmm.
almost more philosophical part of the way that I view thought experiment. I think of thought experiment as a steward for a community, and community is about enrichment, which I think I draw a distinction between that and capitalism, which I think is about extraction. And
Hmm.
so the way that manifests on thought experiment is that we're a data safe and privacy safe space. So not having ads and not selling data to data brokers, one, I think it really should be table stakes for anyone in this industry, because this is sensitive information, right? Like, it has
Hmm.
shouldn't be sold to data brokers. And unfortunately, it's not the norm. The norm is very much the opposite. And so it's really just to say that enabling community is sort of like, that's the highest thing, and so that transcends a lot of different dimensions. And we're trying to take that seriously, listen to our community, and the economic structure of our platform reflects that.
Yeah. Wasn't there a thing where Grinder like released like HIV status to someone and yeah, to
uh,
some company? It was terrible.
yeah, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal recently about kind of the data selling aspects of that business, and it's not just them, and I just don't think it's appropriate. And it's
Yeah.
and I worked in the advertising technology space for some years, and that really informed my perspective on this, of like, no, 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 no. As a general matter, I think our data is our own, but particularly in an area where society stigma still exists, and so we view this as being really sensitive, and
Yeah.
we want to be good stewards of our community.
Yeah. So if you're not selling data or having ads, how do you monetize? Is it like a fee to use the platform?
Yeah, the app is totally it's free to use, to message, to connect with folks. But if you want to use premium features, so for instance, if you want to use the filtering function to only connect with people who are into a specific kink or all these different sort of dimensions, then there's a premium service, which we've tried to price fairly. It's at a discount to a lot of other apps out there because we want to get to what we think is like a fair take rate,
Mhm.
fair exchange for folks within the community, and to keep the lights on, basically.
Cool. Cool. So like I'm curious, like on the demisexual spectrum, like
Yeah,
that's not something that is talked about on apps a
yeah,
lot of like
yeah,
how much emotional connection do you want
totally.
before us? It's often just about sex. And so like I don't know, what's your experience with that and how does it play into the app?
Yeah, it's actually a really that's a great question. I know that for myself, having a level of connectivity, like I want that my partner, like at the end of the day, for me, what is most important to me is pleasing my partner. That is very much core to who I am. Like it's as
Same.
core, it's as core as my sexuality. Like that's my thing, right? Like, and so for me, part of that is a level of connection to that person. Like I need to like know them. I need to like so that is core for my own experience. But you bring up an interesting point. Like that's another dimension that we could be capturing in the app environment that we're not today.
Yeah. Right. And I mean, the demisexual spectrum and the ace spectrum, it's like, you know, there there can be places to connect for everyone along these spectrums, but it's not, you don't see that much right now. Yeah. Awesome. So, if people are interested in this, where can they find the app? Where can they find you guys, or are you on social media? What should they look for?
You can find Hetero on the Apple App Store or Google Play Store by searching for Hetero. It's spelled again Headero. Or you can find us on our website, which is www.hetero.com. Or you can find us on almost all social media platforms with the handle at Hetero App, Headeroapp, with no spaces or dashes or anything like that.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thanks for coming to Two Bye Guys, Stephen. This is a really interesting conversation and like all the kind of stuff we talk about, and you're like putting it out there in the world and trying to make real change. So good luck, and everyone go check out Hetero and have some oral sex and or whatever else you like. Thanks everyone for listening to this episode of Two Bye Guys. Apologies for some of those audio issues if you even noticed them. We had a hardware issue while recording this and we had to go back and record a couple things over. Hopefully you didn't even notice, but if you did, that's why. Thank you again to my guest, Stephen Quaderer. I hope you're all having a nice Bisexual Visibility Month, and we'll be back soon with our next episode featuring Dr. Mimi Huang. Stay tuned. Two Bye Guys is produced and edited by me, Rob Cohen, and it was created by me and Alex Boyd. Our logo art is by Kaitlin Weinman. Our music is by Ross Mincer. We are supported by the Gotham, and we are part of the Zencastr Creator Network. Use promo code 2BYGUYS to get 30% off your first 3 months of Zencastr. Thanks for listening to Two Bye Guys.